Welcome to my Interpersonal Communication Skills project. In this project, I will be taking you on my developmental journey in developing my interpersonal communication skills. My name is Alicia Gwynn, and I am enrolled in the summer HSER 508 course. My overarching goal for my life is to become a better listener. After completing the behavior blend exercise and found that my results indicated that in the category of "this is expected of me," I was an SI personality type, was somewhat surprised that I was as transparent as the survey indicated. People do expect me to be inspiring. However, I'm not quite sure how I feel about being submissive. Another area that caused me to do some reflection was the fact others seem to see me as the perfect people person. When I read this session, it reminded me of an incident when my mother insisted that I go outside to play with the other children when I really wanted to just stay inside and play with my Barbie. This is me results revealed CIS personality type for me. This personality type tends to be more passive than active. The characteristics of this personality type tend to feel more like me, but again, I'm not quite sure. I found that this book on understanding personality patterns will help me to discover my real personality. According to Stewart, communication is a continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. When I was reading this, I began to identify the implications that talked about how culture and communication intertwine. When society is confronted with a person who is not in the norm, they tend to question their intellect and their background. Additionally, this reading had me reflect about how important it is to practice communicating in order to be an effective communicator. Being an ineffective communicator can have a negative impact on relationships, especially in a supervisory or counseling role. I happen to be in both. I am trying to learn to communicate better with my staff, my husband, and my students. This reading helped me to discover some techniques that I can use with regard to strengthening my interpersonal communication skills. I am finally admitting to myself that I was developing things and inspiring other women, doing what was expected of me without finding myself first. This was so prominent within me that I actually developed a workshop series called The Bare Woman. In Ephesians 6:12, John 8:44, Satan tries to defeat us with strategy and deceit through well-laid plans and deliberate deception. Satan tries to bombard our minds to defeat us by using a cleverly devised pattern of little nagging thoughts, suspicions, doubts, fears, wonderings, reasonings, and theories. Reflecting this week drew me to remind myself of this as I began to wonder why I've doubted myself lately. As I continue to reflect on the readings this week, I try to focus on the strongholds that are keeping me from finding my true personality. In 2 Corinthians 10:4 and 5, the Bible speaks of strongholds as being areas in which we are held bondage due to a certain way of thinking. I believe that these readings are helping me overcome my strongholds. John 8:31-32, Mark 4:24 tells us that we must get the knowledge of God's truth in us. I view these readings as God's answers to my prayers. As I begin to reflect on my listening assessment exercise, Burley and Allen, what got me to thinking was the fact that I had always thought that the speaker was totally responsible for the success of communication and that an effective listener keeps an open mind. After taking the assessment exercise, I realized that most people know the things that we should do as speakers, but we don't always practice what we preach. The perception, reception, attention outlined in Chapter 3 is something that I begin to focus on as I begin to develop the delivery of my presentation. I try to make sure my delivery allowed the listener to receive my information through 5 senses. When I was reading about the styles of listening, I became a little overwhelmed when I actually observed students who displayed these characteristics in my class. The faker, the dependent listener, the interrupter, the self-conscious listener, and the intellectual or logical listener. I am continuing to find that I almost have to perform when I am presenting to my students. I do believe that being an effective communicator in a one-on-one or group setting depends on our ability to take into consideration the audience we are addressing and, whenever possible, adapt our presentations to meet their style of listening. In Stewart's article on inhaling perception, 3 perception processes were outlined. The first one, which is selecting, was what I identified with most. Unfortunately, I am often rushing, and the example provided in the reading was something I had just experienced over the Memorial weekend. The mental guidelines or cognitive schemata are used in order to help us with the organization of incoming cues about behaviors and objects. Personal prototypes and scripts are 2 ways we use generalization to represent certain types of people or behavior. I was really moved by the article, It's Only Skin Deep, from But I Thought You Meant, Misunderstandings in Human Communication by Julia Woods in 1998. Woods explained that this world describes communication that emphasizes one aspect of a person above all others. For many individuals from diverse backgrounds, we only see the color of their skin and not the abilities they have or their special uniqueness. She illustrated a perfect example of what I often experience and hear about in my working with students. Filmmaker Spike Lee is quoted as saying, "I want to be known as a young filmmaker. That should be first. But the reality of today is that no matter how successful you are, you're black first. This is still true today." In the readings by Peterson, I found myself really interested in understanding flat brain syndrome. I could identify with the 4 psychological things that occur. The first one, which is described as a stomach overload, was very interesting to me. I can remember times when I was young that my stomach was always upset. I didn't realize that I was carrying the lumps of hurt feelings and the feelings of inadequacy. I can remember always feeling awkward, uncomfortable, and off balance. Peterson describes that this occurs when our stomach containers expand beyond their normal sizes, like tumors, gradually pressuring internal organs out of place. Reading this caused me to rewind to those feelings that I had. I was clearly experiencing stomach overload as a child. I remember praying to God to deliver me from this feeling, to make me strong and give me confidence. God answers my prayers. I sometimes experience some of this to this day. It is greatly reduced, and I had actually forgotten about those experiences until I read this chapter. I'm not quite sure how I feel about understanding why I was feeling so upset during those childhood years. I just thank God that He brought me through it. In the readings on the talk listener process in Peterson, it reminds me of the times that I have said, I know what I want to say, but I just can't say it. Peterson mentioned the 2 parts of talking which I am beginning to work on. The first part is mentioned is that we need to determine what we think and feel. The second component is being able to share these thoughts and feelings in communication. The one thing that the reader states that I didn't think I had a problem with is that this definition assumes that we aren't always clear about what we think and feel and need to talk out loud to clarify. I think that these are the things that I need to work on. This has been an experience in the interpersonal communication class, and I hope to become a better person in the future. Thanks.